So in this particular project, we'll be making an application, and the name of the application is Resort Booking Application. Now this application is built with the help of one of the most powerful JS frameworks, or the JavaScript framework, that is React. In this particular project, we'll be learning about React hooks, how to manage state management, as well as definitely some good practices when developing any sorts of application. Now let's take a look at the app that we're building. In this particular date range, you might be able to select your date range of holidays. For example, if I want my holidays from 10th of February to uh, 15th of February, then you might see that I'm having a 5 night stay, and the room type that I want is deluxe, and the occupants is 2. So yeah, this is going to generate my summary for me. For example, the total room charge, number of nights, total room charges, and discount that I'm getting. Total grand total with discount is what I'm getting, and other charges. So now if I just reduce, at the moment I'm having my charges as 21,240 USD. If I just reduce this to from deluxe to standard, then you might see the prices are different, and it also depends on the number of occupants that we are having. So if I just select that I want a deluxe room and the occupants are supposed to be 2, then charges are different, and so is the number of days that we are staying. Now if I just select a date range that exceeds more than 10 or 20 days, if that happens and I select this, then you might see that we are staying 65 nights, and I really wonder if any sorts of hotel or resort would book for this long. So you might see that we are having an invalid date range and we are not able to see the book summary. So this is the React application that we're building.
So now we'll be starting off with our React application, and thanks to Facebook's Create React App utility, it's fairly simple to do so. All you need to do is that you need to run these 3 commands and your app is up and ready to go. The CI utility does save us a lot of work. It comes with Babel and React DOM pre-installed into our application, so it does save us a lot of time. Now before we start creating a React application, there are certain prerequisites, and that is you need to have Node installed on your systems, which I'm going to presume that you already have, but if you just don't, then download it from the official website, the long-term support version. And to find out which version of Node you are on, just open up a command prompt or Windows or terminal and run the command node with -v, and they should tell you your node version. I am on version 16.13.1. Download it from the official website, and it's fairly simple to do so. You can just download it from here. Therefore, I'm not going to show you how to download and install Node.js. Now, apart from Node, we'll also be needing code editor. I'm going to use VS Studio Code for the purpose of this project. Feel free to use any other code editor, but I'm going to recommend you that you should use VS Code because it comes with a lot of features that might help you during a development process. But if you have some personal preference like Atom or maybe Sublime, then just feel free to use them. At the end of the day, we just need a code editor. Now to create a React application, open up a command prompt. So now let's create an application. So to do that, just run the command npx create react app. Followed by the name of your app. In this case, the name of our app is Resort Booking. Alright, now hit enter, and it's going to take some amount of time to create a React application, and by the time it does, you'll have to wait. So alright, now we are inside of our VS Code instance of our application. That now inside this we are having these node modules. Apart from node modules, we are having certain other folders like the public folder and the source directory. And apart from them, we are having this gitignore, package.json and package.log.json. So now what these folders are. So when talking about node modules, this is going to contain all the packages that we are going to install into our systems. As you might see that there are certain packages with the name Babel and all. So what these packages are, if I just move into my package.json file, you might see that there are modules or packages such as React, React DOM, and React scripts. So all these are node packages. Now apart from these node packages, we are having this public folder. Inside this we are having this favicon.ico and index.html and logo png and certain other files. And our main area of interest lies in our source directory. So now before we actually touch any of these files, let's give it our first run. So open up your inbuilt terminal, and to do that you just have to move into this terminal and click on create new terminal, or alternatively you can press this shortcut as you might see on the screens. Now apart from this, so let's just first give our application our first run. So for that purpose, just move into your terminal and just run the command npm start. So now we see our application is up and running on localhost 3000, and a browser with this URL must have loaded on your browser. So if I just move into my browser, so this is what the CRE utility gives us, spinning React logo with two text that says that to make any changes you have to edit in the app.js file. So just move into your app directory, and the first thing that we're going to do is that we'll be closing this off, and inside the source directory we'll be moving into our app.js file, and we'll be changing the text inside here. So just move into this and remove this entire header segment over here, and instead we'll be having an h1 tag. So let's create an h1 tag, and inside this h1 tag we'll be having our all right, so let's make it working. So working. All right, now hit save, and let's take a look into our application. So now we can see that our text has been replaced. Now we are having this working instead of the spinning React logo and all that other stuff. So now we have made changes into our application. Now if I just move back, and inside the source directory we are having this app.css file. We are having this app.js file, as well as app.test.js and index.css, and these extensions are more than self-explanatory what they do. They're having CSS, and all that CSS that you saw before was applied through these files. There are quite a many ways to apply CSS into our application. We can use the CSS framework. We can write our own CSS. We can use Sass, or we can use the inline styling. There are many ways to write CSS into a React application, and we are having this logo.svg and certain other files. So now let's first get rid of the files that we do not need. We do not need this app.test.js, so let's get rid of this. As well as this logo.svg. All right, so now let's take a look into our public folder. So inside this public folder, we are having this index.html. Now inside this index.html, when you're going to move in here, you'll be seeing certain meta tags and a bunch of link tags. All right, so if I just move down, here you might see this is the title of the application is React app. All right, so before we do any other thing, let's just give it our first run. So to create or run our application or start a server, you just need to open up a terminal, and thankfully VS Code does have a inbuilt terminal. So just create a new terminal, and this is going to create a new terminal for you. So all right, before we move any further and launch our application, there are a few extensions that I'd like you to install, because these extensions are a lot helpful, because they make our development process easy. So to install this particular extension inside of your VS Code, and if you don't have them, then just head to your marketplace that is right over here. As you might see, that a kind of Rubik's cube shape, in which one cube is actually detached from the whole cube. Just head over there. That's the marketplace. All right, so here we like to install certain extensions inside of our application, and that are namely auto-close. So just search for auto-close and head to this auto-close segment. So now what this auto-close does, the name is more than self-explanatory. It is going to make sure that every element that you create has a closing tag. It is really helpful, believe me. After this, we will be also installing this auto rename tag. So what this rename tag does is that, for example, if you decided that you need a h1 component, and for some reason at certain other point of time you decide no, this need not to be an h1, it needs to be an h3. So when you rename the first component, that is the h1 to h3, the closing element is, or the corresponding closing tag is also going to be renamed as h3. So these are the two helpful components that you can have inside of your arsenal if you wish. So all right, after the auto rename and auto close tag, I'd like you to have this extension inside of your VS Code, and that is your bracket pair colorizer. So just search for bracket pair colorizer, and you should just head to the second version of this. Okay, so just install this inside of a VS Code. It colorizes your bracket. Now after this, also install this npm. Just search for npm and install the verified versions of npm, that are namely your npm, that suppose your npm packages as well as your npm IntelliSense. So if you just head into npm, you might see it says it all. It says that this extension supports running npm scripts such as npm start and npm run build, defining the package.json file and validating the installed modules against the dependencies defined in the package.json. Alright, so after this, I'd like you to also install this npm IntelliSense as a package inside of the application. So this helps us in autocomplete. And after this, there's this third package or the fourth package, I don't know which I'm on. This package that is ES7. So just search for ES7. React, Redux, and React Native snippets. So they create the boilerplate for our components that are really good. So I like you to install them as well. And then this last one, and that is Prettier. So Prettier is basically a code formatter that's going to help you to format your code. So you do not need to actually worry about indentation and all. So just install this as well. So these are all the packages that I like you to have inside of your application. Now why don't we actually give this our first run? So just open up your terminal and run the script command that says npm start. Now if you head over to your package.json file, you might see and scroll down. So here are a few script commands that says start, build, test, and eject. So start command is used to start a development server. You'll use the build command when you need to create a build directory, because as of now you might see that there is no such build directory over here. This is for development purposes. Alright, so now let's give it a first run. So just run the command inside of your inbuilt terminal npm start. So now let's create the first component that we need inside of our application. So for that purpose, just move into your source directory, and inside the source directory we'll be creating up a folder with the name components, and inside that we'll be having multiple components. So right inside the source directory, let's create a folder with the name components. Alright, so inside this folder with the name components, we'll be having multiple components. So the first component that we are going to create is the booking component. So create a new file, and the name is going to be booking.js. Alright, now apart from this booking.js, we'll be also having another component that is going to be of name billing, that's going to handle our billings. So let's create another component with the name billing.js. Alright, now after this billing component, let's create another component that's going to be helping us to generate our dates or select our dates. For that purpose, just create a component with the name date selector. So right inside the components folder, create another folder with the name date selector. .js. Alright. Now after this, we'll be creating the last component inside of our components folder, and that is our room details component. So let's create another folder with the name room details. Room details .js. Alright, so these are all the components that we need. Now let's head inside of our app.js file, and inside this let's close off all the other components that we have. Alright, so now let's move inside of our app.js. And inside this, the first step that we're going to follow is that we'll be importing a booking.js component right from our components folder. So let's create first an h2 tag. This tag is going to be having the heading. Seems like there are two now. Alright, so right inside this we'll be having the heading that's going to state that resort booking. So let's create resort booking. Alright, now let's get rid of this h2 as well. Alright, now after this let's import a booking component from our components folder. So the step involves is import a booking from our bookings for booking directory. So from our components folder, and booking. Alright, so now we are good. Now let's define this booking component right over here. Alright, so this is our booking component. Now let's save this. Now we are done with our app.js. Now let's move into our booking.js and start to create it. So inside the booking.js component, the first step is to import React from React, as well as other components that will be calling inside of our booking component. So let's first import React from React. Apart from this, let's import room details, our date selector and billing component also. So import billing. So billing, this is coming from the same directory. So billing.jsx, all right. After this, let's also import our other component. That's our date selector. So import date selector. This is coming from our same directory, that's our components, and the name is date selector. Alright, now after this, let's also import the third and the last component, and that is a room details component. So import room details. And this is also coming from our same directory. Room details. Alright, now we are all good. Now let's create up a class component, but before we do that, we'll be creating a function that's going to generate and give us the difference in dates that we're going to use inside of our date selector. So let's first create that function that's going to help us generate difference in dates. So function, the name is going to be date difference in days. Alright, this is going to take up two parameters. That is basically going to be the two dates between which we want to find the timeline. So let's create this function and create two const. So const utc1, that's the first date, as well as another const that's going to handle the second date. So const utc2. Alright, so now in first we'll be using the date, or date.utc. Now inside this, a.get full year. Get full year. So this is going to return to us the year of that particular date, as well as a.get month. And after this, another that's going to give us the date. So a.get date. Alright, so this is what we are getting. Now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating another const, which we already created now. And inside this, we'll be doing the same thing. But this time, we'll be having b. So b dot get full year, b dot get full month, b dot get full date. So now after this, let's return something from this. So to return this, alright, so now we are getting the dates. That means we are having the dates in form of years, we are having the dates in form of months, and the date. So now we need a constant that's going to unify all of this. So for that purpose, let's create a const, and this is going to be, so const, that's going to help us to convert everything into milliseconds. So const ms per day. and now this is going to make sure that everything is converted inside into milliseconds. So to convert a single day into milliseconds, we will have to multiply 24 times 60 times 60 again and times 1000. Alright, so this is going to make sure that everything is converted into milliseconds. So now I'll be returning this. So return. Now what we're going to return is math.flow, and inside this flow let's subtract our UTC2 minus UTC1. So UTC2 minus UTC1, and inside this we'll be dividing it by 1000 or millisecond per day. So ms per day. Alright, so this is what we'll be returning. Now after, let's save this, and we'll be now creating up a component that we need inside of our application. So for that purpose, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating up a class component. So class booking, and inside this booking it's going to extend to component. Alright, so I just need to put the React keyword over here. So React.component, or perhaps I could just also do it like this. I can import it from the React module itself. Alright, now inside this we'll be having a render method. But before we do that, we'll be having a class, as well as inside the class we'll be having state. So let's create a state inside of our application. So this is going to be equal to state. Now this state is going to hold up certain values. So let's create a state. So constructor this is going to take a props, and inside this will be having a super, and this super is also going to take a props. Now inside this let's create a const, and this is going to hold the today's date. So const today, that's going to be equal to new.date. So const today equals new date. And after this we'll also be creating another const. So it's supposed to be date, not data. So date. Alright, now another const that is going to be responsible for checkout. So check out, this is also going to be equal to new date. And after this what we're going to have is we'll be setting up the checkout. So right outside this, checkout.setDate, and inside this we'll be setting today's date plus 1. So today so today dot get date plus 1. So what this is going to do is it is going to make sure that minimum nights available inside of one particular resort or hotel is 1. So after this let's create the state. So this dot state, and inside this we'll be having the check-in date. So check-in, that's going to be equal to the today, and after this checkout date. So checkout date. Now this checkout date is going to be equal to our checkout, so let's put it equal to checkout. After this, the checkout date. This is going to be equal to checkout. And after this, what I'm going to do is that we'll be having occupants. So that means the number of people that are going to stay, and that's going to be equal to initially 1, but they can increase it to a certain number that is going to be equal to 4 or 5. So room type, that initially is going to be standard, not deluxe and any other room type. So room type, it's standard. All right, so this is our state. Now let's hit save and create the other parts of the component. So now let's create another method inside of our application. So just come right out of your state, and inside this we'll be creating a method. And this is going to be static. Get derived state from props. So get derived state from props. So now if you haven't actually came across this particular method, so let me just tell you about this particular method, and that is get derived state from props. So what get derived state from prop is, it is a method that is used when the state component depends on the change in props. So that means when the state of a component is depending on not only the state but on the props that you are passing to other component, then we use this particular method to handle that. So this is a static method. As you might see that there's a static keyword right in front of this. So now this static method is called just before the render method, which we are about to create. So before the render comes into play, this thing that is get static state from props that take 2 arguments, that is prop and state, is a static method that is just called before the render method in both mounting and the updating phase in React. So now this is all about our static get derived state from props. So now let's create this. So it's going to take up 2 parameters, that is a props as well as a state. So props. So now this is not the only component in which we'll be using get static get derived state from props, but there are other components as well in which we'll be using this method. So now let's calculate the total days. And now we'll be having the use of our function that we created earlier. That's our difference in days. So let's create count const total days. That's going to give us total number of days. This is going to be equal to date difference. So what we just renamed it above. So date difference in days. All right, it's data. So date difference in days. So now date difference in days. All right, so now we are using this, and we'll be passing in the 2 values as we said earlier, the check-in date as well as the checkout date. So let's pass in with the state dot check-in date as well as state dot the checkout. All right, so now we are accessing these values from our states. Now after this, we'll be calculating whether or not travelers are planning for a full year vacation. So if they are planning for if the number of days that they're planning to stay is more than what we actually accommodate for, then we want to show them that this is not available inside of our restaurants or the guest houses. All right, so now invalid range. This is going to be equal to if total days is less than equal to 0. That means if number of days is less than equal to 0, that means they haven't specified or selected an appropriate size of the dates. then we want that to be of invalid range. Or if the total number of days is greater than 10, that means at most our hotels can accommodate their trip for about 10 days. You can also increase that, so let's put it equal to 20. That's the most that we can go. And after this, what we are going to do is that we'll be returning. So now right after this, let's return. Let's return a total number of days. So total days as well as invalid range. Or let's say these two are the values that we're returning. Alright, so now there are certain other methods that we'll be creating, but before we create them, alright, so let's create them first. So the one of the methods is going to be for our handling our check-in, and then other method is going to handle our checkout. So the first method that we'll be creating is to handle our check-in, and the second method that's going to handle our checkout status. Apart from these two methods, we'll be having other method for our occupants. That means to handle the number of occupants that we have. So, and after this we'll be also having another method that is going to handle our room type. So room type. So basically you can say this particular stuff that we are having every method that is going to say each and every state is going to have their method so that they can be changed. So this is what all is about our methods. So now let's create these particular methods that we'll be needing inside of our application. So the first is going to be named as on check-in change. So let's name it on check-in change. This is going to take up a parameter. So now let's make this an arrow function. So because we do not want to bind and do that other stuff. So on change, on check-in change, and this is going to take up check-in date. So check-in date, this is what it is going to take up. Now once it does that, now let's set the state. So this dot set state, and inside this we'll be changing check-in date to what our user has selected. So check-in date, this is going to be equal to check-in date. All right. Now after this, let's create a other method that's going to handle our checkout. So right outside, okay, so right beneath your checkout, let's create another method that's going to handle our checkouts. So this checkout is going to, okay, on checkout, on checkout change, this too is going to take some amount of props, that's a data that's going to be equal to checkout data. So checkout date, and this too is an arrow function. Now inside this, what this is going to do, this is also going to set the state. So this dot set state, and inside this we'll be passing it with a checkout date. So checkout date. All right. Now the fourth method that we're going to create is for the occupants. So let's create another method for our occupants. So on occupants change, that means if user is having more occupants inside of their room, so change this store is going to take some amount of data that's going to be equal to occupants. That means the number of people that are going to stay, and this is going to set the state for occupants. So this dot set state, this is for our occupants. All right. Now after this, the last method that we're going to create is for our room types. So let's make this as well. So on room type change, on room type change, room type, and inside this we'll be having the room type. All right, now we are all good with this. So this dot set state. So this dot set state. All right, so now we have created all the methods that we need inside of our application. So we are having a method for our check-in, our checkout, our occupants, as well as the room type. So now you can say that each and every state is having their own method that's going to change their data according to the user's need. Now we'll be creating the render method. So let's come right beneath our room type change, and we'll be creating a render method now. So now inside this we're going to have a render method. So render method, inside this let's create a return. So we have created a function that's going to make sure that there's difference in days, state, as well as the methods that we need. Now at last what we're going to do is that we'll be creating a render method. So let's create one. So this is going to have a return, and inside this return what we're going to pass it with is our div. So let's create a div now, and inside this div we're going to dispatch event. All right, that's not what we want. So div, all right, let me just scroll down so that's visible to you. All right, now inside this div what we're going to have is h2 tag. So let's create that h2 tag first. So an h2 tag that's going to hold the text booking. So booking, and inside this h2 we'll be calling all of our components that we created. That includes our date selector, room details, and billing. So the first on the list is our date selector. So date selector. All right, now we are good with this. And after this date selector, we'll be calling the other method or other components, that's room details, and then will come our billing. So room details, and then comes our billing. Now billing, there are certain conditions for billing to appear. That means the date shouldn't be invalid. I mean, we want to present to them the billing invoice only if we are sure that they are selecting the right amount of details. That means they're not exceeding the number of days that we want, that is our 20 days. So if that's the scenario, then only we want this billing component to render. So this is going to be conditionally rendered. That means if not this dot state invalid range. So if this is the case, that means invalid range is false. If this is not the case, then only we want our billing to render. So inside this we'll be having a billing. Alright, so this is all what we are having inside of a booking. Now there's humongous amount of props that we are going to pass to each one of these components. So, and those props are going to be nothing but the state as well as these particular methods that we have just created. So now let's pass those data inside of our applicants. So right inside of our date selector, we'll be passing it with at first the check-in date. So this is going to take the check-in date first. So check-in date, this is going to be equal to this dot state dot check-in date, and after this the checkout date. So checkout date, this is going to be equal to this dot state, not set state, this dot state dot checkout date. All right, and after this what we're going to do is that we'll be also giving it total days. So total days, this is going to be equal to this dot state. All right, so it should be inside this dot state, this dot state dot total days. as well as our invalid range. So invalid range, this is going to be equal to this dot state dot invalid range, as well as our two methods that are going to be namely our on check-in change as well as on checkout change. So on check-in change, this is going to be equal to this dot on check-in change, as well as the other method that's our checkout one. So on checkout change, this is going to be equal to this dot on checkout change, on checkout change. All right, so now we are passing it with all the data. Okay, so now the next step is to pass the data to our room details now. So we'll be passing, it is going to take up certain data that is going to be equal to our occupants. So this is going to be equal to occupants, that is going to be equal to this dot state dot occupants. And after this, it is also going to take up room type. So pass it the room type as well. So room type, this is going to be equal to this dot state dot room type. All right, now after this, on room type change as a method. So on room type change, this is going to be equal to this dot state dot room type change. So on room type change, and after this is going to take the on occupant change method as well. So on occupants change, this is going to be equal to this dot on occupant change. All right, so now we are giving the data or the details to our occupants as well. Now the last component on which we have to pass the props is a billing component. So inside this, what you're going to do is that we'll be passing it with the room type. So room type, this is going to be equal to this dot state dot room type, and after this the total days. So total days is going to be equal to this dot state dot total days, and after this also the third property, that's our occupants, because billing needs to calculate that. So on occupants, this dot state dot occupants. All right, so now we have successfully created a booking component that all was required in this. All right, so now let's save this and move into the other components that we need inside of our application. But before we do that, we need to export this, right? We are creating this class component, but we are not exporting it till now. So let's export it as well. So export default booking. All right, so now we have created a component that's a booking component. So now after our booking component, the first component that we'll be taking a look at is our billing component. So now let's close this and move into our billing.js. So inside of this, inside of our billing.jsx, what we're going to do is that we'll be creating up a class component again. But before we do that, let's import our React from React. So React from React module, and my intuition says that I'll also be needing this components. So let's import this as well. So component. All right. Now let's create a class component that's going to be equal to class billing, and this is going to extend component. All right, now inside this, let's export this as well. So export default billing. All right, so now this is going to have a state. So let's create a constructor. And this is going to take up props, and inside this super. All right, so now let's have a state. So this dot state, and inside the state we're going to have properties. So the first is going to be room charge. So room charge, that's 0 and equal to, okay, room charge, that's 0 and a comma, and then occupant charges. So occupant charges, that is going to be again equal to 0, and after that total room charge, now this is all the default data before our user has selected anything, so that's going to be 0 0 0 because we do not want to actually build them initially, but we are going to do them once they select their preferences. So total room charge, perhaps total room charges, that's going to be again equal to 0, and after this total room charges we are going to have a total room occupant charges. So total room occupant charges, that is equals to 0, and then discount, that's going to be equal to 0, and then another property that's going to handle the total amount that we have. So let's name it grand total. This again is going to be equal to 0, and after this, after tax, that means what value are we going to get after the taxes have been deducted. So tax, that again is 0 now. So now this is our state. Now let's get out of the state and create the method again, that is going to be a static get derived state from props. So let's create a method that's going to be static get derived state from props. Now static, so we are supposed to be outside this. Okay, now we're good. So gets derived state from props. Now this is going to take up two parameters, props and state. So props and state. Now inside this we are going to destructure the properties that we are getting from our component, that's our booking component. So let's open a booking component to see what all we are passing from a booking component. Now to open any component like this, you just have to press Ctrl+3 and this screen is going to appear. Then search for the component that you need, so booking, and here it is. So from a booking component, I see that inside of my billing I am passing room types, the total number of days, as well as the occupants. So this is what you're going to destructure over there. So inside this, let's create a const. So const, and this is going to be equal to room type as well as total days as well as occupants. Now this is going to be equal to our props. All right. Now after this, what we're going to do is that inside of our get derived state from props, we're going to calculate the room charge. So const, let's create a const. That's a constant, and that's room charge. This is going to be equal to room type double equals if standard. If the room type is standard, then the charge is 2000, and if that's not, then the charge is 4000, because so now once we have calculated the room charge, now let's move to other charges that we are going to create. So right inside this, let's create another charge that's going to be equal to const, and this const is going to have contain the occupant charges. So occupant charges. Now this is going to be equal to the occupants that we are getting from our props, that is initially 1. And if there is any change in the occupants, that means if the occupants exceeds 1, then what do you want to do is that if the occupants exceeds 1, that means if the occupant is 0 or 1, or let me get this straight. If the occupants is 1, then the occupant charge is 0. And if that's not the case, then what do you want to do is that then you want to charge the occupants, and that charge is going to be incremented with 200. That means per person more than 1, we are going to charge 200 rupees extra. So 200 extra for that. So occupant minus 1, that means initially the first occupant is going to have no extra charge, but per head more than that, then you want to increase the price by 200. All right, so this is our occupant charges. Now after our occupant charges, we're going to calculate the room charges. So const room charges this is going to be equal to total days that we're getting multiplied by room charge. So room charge. All right, so this is going to be total room charges. Now after this, we'll be also calculating total occupant charges. So const total total occupant charges. Now this is going to be equal to multiplied by total days into occupant charge. So total days times occupant charge. All right, so now we are calculating what all that we need inside of our static get derived state from props. Now we'll be calculating the taxes. So now this may differ from person to person, but before we do the taxes, let's give them a discount. So let me just scroll down. And inside this, we're going to have constant. So const, this is going to be equal to this constant is going to have the discount value. So discount. Now this discount is going to be equal to total days. That means this discount is going to apply it for total days that are greater than equal to 5, and if this is the case, then we want the discount to be 15. If not, then 0. Alright, so this is a discount policy. And after this, let's create a grand total. So const grand total. This is going to be equal to math seal total room charges subtracted or reduced total room charges. So again, total room charges minus discount divided by 100. So this is going to be contained inside of our 100.0. All right, so now this is going to be contained inside of our grand total. So now let's just move outside of our grand total and let's create a constant again. Now we'll be doing our taxes. So const after tax, this is going to be equal to total occupant charges plus grand total. So total occupant charges plus grand total. So grand total times 1.18. 1.18. Alright, so this is after tax. Now we have to return all this data that we're getting. So let's return the entire data set that we have. So return, and inside this return we're going to have a room charge as well as a occupant charge. Now next in the row is total room charges. So total room charges, and after this total room charges, total occupant charges. So total occupant charges, and after this the discount, the grand total, and after tax. So discount, not fish count, discount, grand total as well as after tax. Alright, so now we are passing all this data or returning all this data from our static get date derived state from props. It's a tongue twister for me. So after this we'll be creating a render method, and inside that render we are going to have summary and all that. So right after this method, that's a get derived state from props, let's create a render method. And inside this render we're going to have return, and inside this return let's first create a div. So this, the first thing that we're going to do is that we'll be creating a div, and inside this div, let me just scroll down a little bit so that's visible. And inside this div, the first text is going to be an h2 tag that's going to hold the text billing. All right, now after this h2 tag of billing we are going to have a table. So let's create a table now, and inside this table we are going to have body. So table body, and inside this table body we are going to have table rows as well as table data. So the first table row, and inside this table row we are going to have TDs. So TD, alright, so the first TD is going to have the room charges. So room charges, now there's going to be one more TD inside this that's going to contain the data. So TD, and inside this let's have the data that says that this dot state dot room charges. So this is a room charge. Now feel free to put up any currency less that you want USD, so you can put up USD or maybe INR or ruble or any other currency that you wish. I'll just put up USD, and after this let's create another table tier element. So tier again, and inside this we are going to have the number of nights that particular person is going to stay, or the group of that particular person is going to stay. So number of nights. So again one more TD, and inside this dot props, because this data is coming via props, this is nothing inside of our state. So if I just move into my props segment, so you might see that we are having this particular total days that we are getting via props. So this dot props dot total days. All right, now let's come out of this particular TR and we'll be creating another table row. So TR again, and inside this we are going to have TDs, TD element TD, and inside this TD we are going to have total room charges. So total room charges, and inside this we're going to have the total room charges. That's no biggie. So inside this dot state dot total room charges. So if I just scroll up, you might see that this is also the data that we are getting via props. So total room charges, no, this is not the props, this is the state one. Okay, so total room charges, that's 0 initially. So put up the currency that you wish, again USD. And after this, let's create another table row that's going to be handling the discount. So table row, and inside this there are a TD element, and inside this TD element we're going to have the discount. So discount, and right beneath this one more element, and this is going to contain the discount value of our state. So this dot state dot discount, and after this let's create one more table row and two similar elements. Okay, let me just copy this and paste it again, and inside this we're going to have our grand total with discount. So let's create grand total with discount, and right beneath it we'll be having that grand total value, and that is going to be equal to this dot state dot grand total. This dot state dot grand total. All right, now after this we'll be creating another table row that's going to be for our occupants. All right, so inside this table row we are supposed to have the elements. So TD, one more TD, and inside this we're going to have total number of occupants. So this data is that we are getting from a props. So this dot props dot occupants. So if I just move up a little bit, you might see that yeah, we are getting this data of occupants from our props. Now all right, after this let's create another table row that's going to handle the occupant charges. So another table row that's going to handle the occupant charges. And inside this we're going to have the charges. So this dot state dot occupant charges, state dot occupant charges. All right, one more table row, and inside this we are going to have let's put up text also. So USD per day, and after this inside this the element. Okay, so inside this put up total occupant charges. So total occupant charges. All right, so now let's place this data right beneath this. This dot state dot total occupant charges. And finally the last row, so TR again. Now this is going to have the text that says that the after taxes, not taxes but taxes, and inside this we're going to have the value that has been generated after taxes has been reduced. So not a table. And inside this we're going to have the taxes. So this dot state dot after tax. USD. Alright, so now we have created a billing, and that was literally a lot of HTML and CSS. So let's close this now, and we'll be moving into our other components, also perhaps maybe date selector next. So now we are done with two of our components. Now let's move into a third component that's going to be a date selector. Now there are certain other libraries that we're using inside of our application, and those are namely the prop types that is going to help us to do the properties checking, as well as the React date picker that's going to help us to create a calendar as in form of UI, so that users can select the dates easily, because that is going to help us inside of our application. So to do that, let's just install those particular libraries, and to do that, just open up the inbuilt terminal, and inside this just run the command that says that npm install react date picker as well as prop types. All right, this can be shorthanded to npm I react date picker and prop types. It doesn't really matter. Now hit enter, and it is going to install these two particular libraries inside of application. So by the time it does, let's create a component that's our date selector. So import React app. So import React from the React module. From React. And after this, I don't feel like as if I will be needing components inside this. Let's import the prop types. Import props types. This is coming from a module that is prop types. All right. Now after this, what we're going to do is that we'll be also importing our date picker. So import date picker. This is coming from our library that's is React date picker. All right, now this is going to be an arrow functional component. So let's create a functional component now. Const date selector. Now this is going to take up properties that is equals to props, and inside this we're going to have a let. But before we do that, let's give this a return. That's going to have, inside this return we are going to have a div. So inside this return, let's create a div. So div all right, now inside this div we're going to have an h2 tag. So let's create an h2 tag that is going to be holding the text date range. And after this we'll be having the date picker. So let's import our date picker now. So date picker, now we are going to have two date pickers, one for the check-in date and other for the checkout date. So let's import those two date pickers inside of our application. So the first date picker, that's going to be equal to that's going to be responsible for our check-in date, and the other date picker that's going to be responsible for our checkout date. All right, so we are already getting props inside of this. Now let's create a let. So let's create a let. Now this is going to be equal to props. So we are destructuring all the data that we'll be using, and it's not quite convenient to write props every time we are using that particular data. So now let what we're going to have inside of these lets is the check-in date. So if I just move back into my booking component so that we can see what all we transferred from there. So booking.js, we have transferred into our date selector the check-in date, the checkout date, the total days, and the invalid range, as well as the on check-in change and on checkout change, and that's a lot of properties that we're handling over there. Okay, so now let's destructure all that data. So check-in as well as a check-in date, as well as, let me just confirm it, Is it check-in date? Yeah, it is. As well as the second property, that's the checkout date. So rather than having the in, just the out. All right. So we're having this check-in date, the checkout date, and the total days. And the third property is on check-in change. So on check-in change. On check-in change, as well as, all right, so there should be a comma. After this, on check-in change, on checkout change, and invalid range. On checkout change, on check out change. So these are the methods that are going to help us to change the check-in and checkout dates, as well as the invalid range. All right, so let's see that. Is it invalid range? Yeah, it is. All right. So we are having these two date pickers now. Each one of them is going to handle two properties. In total, these two date pickers are going to have four properties that are going to be passed to them. So the first date picker is going to have the property that is going to be equal to selected. So this is going to be equal to the initial properties of our date picker. So what is selected? This is going to be equal to the check-in date. So check-in date. Now this is also going to have an on change that's going to be responsible for changing our dates. So if this is the case, then we want to pass in on check-in change. And after this, this is going to take up two properties. Now this is going to be similar for the other date picker that's going to handle our checkout changes. So this is going to have the property selected as well. So that's going to be equal to checkout date. Which initially is nothing but 1 day after the check-in date. That's the default property, which is changeable if a user wants that. So on change, this is going to be equal to checkout change. So this is checkout on checkout change. All right, so this is the two properties that a user is having. Now after this, we want to display, let's create a span, and inside the span we're going to display to the users the number of days that they're staying. So inside the span we'll be using this total days property. So total days is the number of days that the particular person is staying. Now conditionally we want to render a statement that means if the user selects the invalid range date, that means the dates are too long, for example 1 month or 2 months or 3 months or less than 1 day, then we want to display to them that no, this is not possible, this is the invalid range. So if invalid range is true, then double ampersand. If invalid range is true, then we want to display a paragraph tag. Now this paragraph tag is going to have the text that states that this is invalid range. All right, so this is our date selector. Now we need to do the type checking inside of our application on check-in change. So this was partially completed. All right. Let's do the type checking inside of our application now. So to do that, we'll be just head outside of a component. So now let's first do the type checking that involves date selector. So date selector dot prop types, that is going to check the types of our props. So prop type prop types. Now inside this, we'll be checking the properties that we are having inside of our application. So we want to make sure that the check-in date, so check-in date is prop types dot instance of date. Instance of, that means this is something that is date, and this is required. All right, now after this, the second property that we're going to have the checking on is the checkout date. and this is similar to the one above. That is props type dot, this should be an instance of date. All right, and after this is also required. These are the required properties. And after this, we'll make sure that the on check-in change is a function. On check-in change is props types dot function is function, and this too is required, so required. And after this, on checkout change, on checkout change, this too is going to have a similar function, so this should be a function, and this too is required. And after this, the last type checking, and that is going to be on our total days, and this is going to be equal to prop types dot number. This is supposed to be a number, and this too is required. All right, so a comma over here. All right, so now we are done with the date selector component as well. Now let's move to a last component and configure it. So now let's close off all the other components and move into the last component that we'll be creating, and that's a room details component. So head into the room details component. This too is going to be a functional component, and it's going to contain two components inside of this. So let's create those two. So the first step is to import React from React. So that's what you're going to do. So let's import React from React. And inside of this, well, the first is going to be a functional component that's going to help us to select. So let's name it const select. Let's destructure the data right here only, what we are going to do over there. So we'll be having a selected value. Apart from the selected value, we'll also be having options that we're about to create. Options. And after this, the third one, that's on date change. On date change. Now inside this, we're going to have a select element. So let's have a select element over here. Now let's close this. Now inside this select element is going to have an on change as well as value property. So let's pass in that. So inside the select, we are going to have an on change. This on change is going to be having a target as well as a value. So target. On date change, and inside this we'll also be passing it with a value. All right, so this is the on change, and after this, let's give this a value, and this is going to be equal to selected value. So all right, this is our select. Now we'll be having options inside of this that's going to be mapped over. So we'll be creating a const with options. So let's first map this options.map, and inside this map, each and every time it's going to take up a single option, and once it does so, it's going to make sure that it returns that option. So option, now this option is going to have a value, a key, so give this a value as well, that's going to be equal to option dot value as well as a key, otherwise React is going to yell at us that each and every mapped element should have a separate key so that it can identify it. So option dot name, and inside this we're going to put up the name of the option, option dot name. Alright, so this is a select component. Now let's create those options that we need inside of our application. So let's head into a booking component. So head into the booking component, and inside this we see that inside of our room details. All right. Okay. Now let's head back into our room details option. Alright, so after this, let's create some options for our occupant options as well as for our room type options. So the first step is to create options for our occupant options. So let's create a const occupant options. Now this is going to be an array of objects. So let's create an array, and inside this we're going to have 4 objects. So let's create 4 objects inside this. All right, now these are 4 objects. Probably I should just revert this back to 1. Okay, so we'll be creating 4 objects. Each one is going to have a name, so let's give them a name. Now this is going to be equal to 1 as well as a value that's going to be 1. Now in similar continuation, we'll be having the name of 2, 3 and 4. So let's just copy this and paste it 4 times. So 1, 2, 3 and 4. All right, so each one is going to have a value 1, 2 and 3, 4. Okay, so let's make them 2 and 2. 3 and a 3, a 4 and a 4. So now we'll be using these values inside of our application, but for now let's just create it. Now after this we'll be creating another object that is going to be an array of objects. This is going to be for the room types. So let's create const room types, room type option. All right, now this again is going to be an array of objects, but there are going to be only 2 objects inside this. One of them is going to be of name, that's going to be standard. So we are going to have a name standard as well as a value. Okay, so all right, the name standard and the value that's going to be equal to standard. So standard. Now the next object is going to be of name deluxe as well as the value of deluxe. So let's create another object with the name deluxe. All right, so I selected both of them, and now let's just run deluxe. And by the way, if you're wondering what I just did now, this is what we call to as multicast editing. To do this, you have to select a text, and so for example, if I just select this particular text known as deluxe and I press Ctrl plus D, then all the text with the same name are going to be selected. You can just keep on pressing Ctrl D and Ctrl D and Ctrl D to the point of time that you select all the text that you need to select, and after that you can edit them. So I could just name them deluxe, as well as let's copy this again and create a third option, luxurious. So let's copy them and select them. So just note this particular stuff, that the consequent or the next word is going to be selected first, and then that's going to come up. So luxurious. All right, so this can be done, although we'll be having just these 2 options inside of our room options. We are done with our options now. Let's name this options. Okay. All right, so now let's create our next component that is going to be a room details component. So let's create a functional component that's const room details. This too is going to take some amount of props. All right, so now inside this we'll be having a return. So let's give this a return now. So let's create a div inside this return, and inside this div we are going to have an h2 tag. So let's create an h2 tag. This h2 tag is going to have the room details, so room details, and after these room details we are going to have a label, and inside this label we are going to have the room type, so room type. So this is the label for that particular select. Now let's come down beneath this label. Now let's before we move any further, let's destructure the data that we are getting from our booking.js. So just come right over here. You can destructure it over here or any other place, it doesn't really matter. I could just destructure these properties right over here also, but let's just do it this way. So const room type, as well as occupants. Apart from occupants, on room type change and on occupants change. So on room type change, as well as the next and the last one, that's on occupants change. This is going to be equal to props. All right, so this is the data that we're getting. It should be types. Okay, occupants on room type change and occupants change. If I just take a look into my booking and head down over there, so occupants, room type, on room type change, on occupants change. All right, so this is all the data that we are passing via props. Okay, so this we are good now. Let's just make sure that it's indented properly, and after this what we're going to do is that we'll be adding two selects, one for the room type and other for the occupants. So we are having this label, one for the room, and now we'll be having a select. Remember we created the select right over here, and to this we'll be passing the selected values and options and on all that. So okay, so the select is going to have a property that we're going to pass to it. First let's just close this. Now this is going to be self-closing select. All right, so now I will be passing it with selected value. This is going to be equal to the room type, the data that we're getting. So room type, so it should be room type. Just take care of these spellings over there. All right, so room type, and after this let me just double check this. So is it room type? Indeed it is. Now let's head back. All right, so now after selected value, also give this the options. So options, it's also taking up options now. Now these options are our room type options. So room type options that we just created over here. As you might see that we are having standard option as well as a deluxe option. Now after this option on data change. So on date change. No, this is the data change, not date change. Okay, it's supposed to be data. All right, so on data change, on data change. All right, now we are good with this. On data change, we want this equals to on room type change. All right, now we are good with this. Now let's create another label right outside of right inside this div. So we'll be having another label. Now inside this label we'll be having the text occupants. All right, now inside this we're going to create a select again. So select, and this is a custom made select. So select value, this is going to have the occupants as well as it is also going to have options. Option, this is going to be equal to the options that we created over here, that says that constant occupants option, occupants options. All right, now after this occupants option we're also giving this an on data change. So on data change, this is going to be equal to On occupation change, on occupants change. All right, so now we have, let's make this a self-closing div, self-closing select. All right, so now we are all good with this. Now let's export our room default. Export room details. All right, export default room details. All right, so now we have successfully created our application. We have make sure that each and every component is built properly. Now you might have this CSS file provided with you. Now just copy the entire CSS that's in that index.css file and come and paste it over here, because as of now you might see that there is no CSS except the default CRE utility CSS. So just remove this entire CSS over here and paste that CSS over here so that you can get a better look of your application. Now let's hit save and take a look into our application.